If you'd like to hear the full episode or any of the scenario archives, be sure to subscribe and click the link in our bio. Also, like and follow the Scenario Radio Show on all of our social media platforms for more real talk with the playlist. Peace.
All right, welcome back to the Scenario Radio Show. That was KB's pick, Baby Kisser, King of Pop, dancer extraordinaire, Michael
Too many
Jackson.
adjectives.
Michael Jackson, we don't need a baby kisser, you're saying?
Too many adjectives.
Well, you know, he would be kissing babies all over the land, is what I've been told.
One from every continent.
Brown babies.
Babies of every shade being kissed by Michael Jackson in for COVID-19. All right, I'm sorry. No. Anyway, we are here on the Scenario Radio Show, and today's show is entitled Sing About Me. We're memorializing artists and their work and the ones that have passed and why it's important to us. We want to talk about the emotional content of that. And, of course, if you're going to do that, you want to have somebody who can talk about it in an educated way. So we have our guest co-host, James Bush, host of the Done Son podcast and also licensed counselor. All right, James. So when here's the cycle, and the cycle is usually an artist dies. Everybody mentions that the artist dies in social media. Everybody wants you to know, oh my goodness, so-and-so died. I can't believe they died. This has been such a rough year. And then people start playing their music. They start sharing more of their music. And then at some point you get the subsequent backlash from people who say, but y'all didn't even know nothing about this artist until now. And now all of a sudden y'all want to cling to it and this and that. What is it about us as human beings that makes this cycle a thing you can almost expect like clockwork?
I think it's connection. Being able to identify with that person where you were when you first heard their music. And maybe some of the traumatic situations that you were experiencing when you were hearing their music. And so, I mean, I look at it from the same reason as people were identifying with Mary J. Blige. I mean, she's not dead, but Mary J. Blige's music, the early Mary. And some of the things that she was talking about and the connection that goes along with that. Or I'm Tupac Shakur when he was making his empowerment and the connection that goes along with that. So from a scientific standpoint, we have the dopamine, we have the serotonin levels that come into play, and the enjoyment, how it makes you feel and how it takes you to a different place or anything like that when you're experiencing it in that moment. And so now you go on maybe a couple years or so like that, and then that same song, that same voice, it triggers or it emotes that response in you because it's connecting.
KB?
I saw somebody say,
yeah KB.
I had my hand out. I was gonna let you finish your thought, but what I was going to say is that what are some healthy ways that fans can grieve losses of celebrities? What are some healthy ways that we can do that?
I mean, the main thing is just celebrate their life, celebrate what they meant to you. Nobody can tell you how you felt. I mean, okay, so we have the 5 stages of grief: denial, acceptance, bargaining, and depression. And then again, like I said, anger. All of those things that come along with that. Allow yourself to go through that process. Feel your feelings, because if you do not feel your feelings, you're doomed to repeat each and every one of them or get stuck in one of those situations. So you got to be able to kind of figure out, okay, where am I at when it comes to this person or that artist or that performer or anything like that? What did they mean to me? And going through that process wholly. And I think that's one of the best ways to do so. No one has a timetable on grief. For some people it can last a week, literally a week. For some people it can last maybe 2 years or so, because it depends on what that person meant to that individual. I can't tell you. As a therapist, I can go along that journey and help you pick out the different items of what was taking place. For instance, if I had a young man who, during the mid-'90s, early '90s, mid-'90s, he identified with Tupac, and maybe he came from a single-parent household where he didn't really have a father in line, or so like that. Him hearing his lyrics or him hearing his music or so like that, it resonated with him or so like that. It made him feel a certain type, made him feel special, or made him feel more empowered or anything like that. So then when that young man Tupac dies or something like that, there's a loss, there's a connection, there's a missing in that moment. And so now we're just trying to help him connect the dots and say, okay, what did you learn and how do you move forward with what you've learned?
Yeah. So I guess you're saying in some ways, our connections to artists and the grief we may have if an artist passed isn't just about the passing of the artist. Sometimes it's tied to a lot of our own experiences, some other experiences as well. Then
Definitely. I definitely believe that. It's the same thing. When you brushed me with the topic, I thought immediately the first thing that came to my mind when James Evans died on Good Times, and how
Yeah.
everyone felt about that. It's like the culture. We was like, oh my god, it's
Yeah.
like it was catastrophic because James Evans was dad. He was that's who he was to us. And then I mean it was amazing. Or oh Lord, I hate to use this one, but okay, Bill Cosby. Before we knew everything else we knew, Dr. Heathcliff Huxtable was the all-American dad.
Yeah.
He was it. I mean, he was who he was, and we identified with that. We identified with the Cosby Show in some way. Now, as we got older, we started to maybe look at things differently. But when we were younger, while our minds and brains are still developing, because they don't really fully form until the age is around 25, 26 anyway, that's what they meant to us. And so there's a connection.
Yeah, and I think the thing to keep in mind is that good art should resonate with you on an emotional level, and so if it does resonate with you that way, it doesn't mean that you have some disconnect with reality because there's something about the idea of the father, Cliff Huxtable, that resonates with you. Whether you had a father or not around, then it just makes sense. Now, it's another thing if you actually are literally walking around talking to Cliff Huxtable in your home, I guess. Then, there's room for that, too. I guess there's counseling for that, too, but that's a whole other different type of thing.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Do you think that maybe, like, the millennials or the generation before us as well, we kind of don't understand the impact that, Generation Z? When their artists die, because there's been like in the last 3 years there's been 12 promising young artists whom I personally don't really listen to, but they were very popular with the younger generations, people in high school, middle school right now, and we kind of just be like, oh, okay, I don't know who that was. And then we don't kind of understand the impact that they have. Yeah, they may have had a certain type of music that maybe some of us weren't into, and most likely they passed away from drug overdoses. And it's like, I wonder how that affects the younger generation, or not necessarily just their fans, but just that grief process of, because in the 90s, a lot of rappers were dying, they were being killed.
Yeah.
Now the younger artists, they're either dying from suicide or drug overdoses.
Yeah.
So that in itself, to me, seems like it may affect a person, especially if they were connected to their artist. But I think sometimes it's harder for us as the older generations to consider that sometimes. I just thought of it as we were talking, because they're like, we were talking about music. Yeah, but it's some artists who I don't really know, who I know have passed away, but I don't have a connection to them.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things when you just said that, what immediately came to my mind is that during this generation, the generation that you mentioned, there's a heavy drug culture that is in there. And we know what drugs do. They mask emotions. They mask feelings. And so when that happens, we're looking at it and we're saying, okay, they're not necessarily connected. It's not that they're not connected, but they can't really experience that feeling because they have so many numbing agents that they're continuing to take over and over again, that it doesn't allow them to experience the full process.
So,
but wasn't it kind of like that in the 70s still? It's always been like a drug culture.
Well, it's cyclical, I think. For instance, I'm a Gen Xer, and like you said, in Gen X, some of the artists who would die, there are two ways artists are dying in Gen X. There are the ones who were being murdered, and a lot of us saw there was a lot more violence also when we were coming up and when we were younger. So that's obvious. But now a lot of them are dying from health issues that come from people who may have lived a life that just didn't allow for them to take care of themselves. When Phife Dawg died, and he died of diabetes, and we're having people with heart condition at my age group, it's like that's an indicator. All of these are indicators of what's going on in our culture. So yeah, and my parents, in their age, in the 70s and 60s, artists were dying of drug overdoses. But there were different drugs than the drugs that these Gen Z kids are dying of now.
Yes.
So yeah, I think it's all of it is indicative of our cultures, the cultures that we live in ourselves. Okay, we are getting to a point where it looks like we've got to go to another break, and we're going to go with my pick. Okay, so here's my pick. I decided to go with Bill Withers. I'll try to be brief about it, but Bill Withers, the reason his music was important to me and the idea of using him as a pick was important to me was because being someone from the rural South, like Bill Withers, his music always had that feel to it. no matter what he's doing, whether it's funk inspired, whether it's a smooth, soft ballad, everything he did, you could hear the backwoods of the South in his tone. It's as old as slavery and working out in a field and all of these things. So it's just unapologetically, purely black, and in a way that I just have a real deep appreciation for. And again, a lot of it's really funky. The drums that they do on this stuff, like you see why hip hop artists decided to sample some of this stuff. In fact, the song that I'm going with, "Moaning and Groaning,"
Lord.
is a song that goes hard like that on the drums. So that's what we're going to play right here on the Scenario Radio Show. "Moaning and Groaning," Bill Withers. When we come back, we're going to get a couple more thoughts from James Bush, because we got to get ready to let him go. But if he can stick with us for just a moment, we're going to get a couple more thoughts from him, and then we'll hear some more about some more artists. So y'all stay with us.
This is the Scenario Radio Show. Real talk with a playlist.
That's the